Good morning. I am Sheikh Modibo Diarra, and I'm the chairman of ALN. And I have the privilege this morning to moderate the first panel entitled Africa's Transition to Democracy and Development, Navigating Political and Economic Minefields. And I have the privilege to have this distinguished panel here, comprised of Dr. Jender Fraser. Jender is the president and CEO of 50 Ventures, a private investment company that seeks to elevate Africa's global standing by investing in its governance, education, enterprise, and stability sectors. And on another note, Mrs. Fraser was a leading architect of U.S.-Africa policy for nearly a decade, serving as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs from August 2005 all the way to January 2009. Jender, welcome. Next, I have Mr. Robert Hershoff, Chairman and CEO of Invest Africa. Robert Hershoff is a South African entrepreneur, senior executive and private investor based in London. He currently serves as Chairman and CEO of Invest Africa, which he founded with the purpose of delivering on the demand for high-quality relationship within growing Africa market amongst the business community. Welcome, Robert. Next, we have Mr. Mohamed Amersi, founder and CEO of Emergence Telecom Ventures. Mohamed Amersi is CEO and co-founder of Emergence Telecom Ventures, which is a Dubai-based emerging market consulting, advisory, and asset management firm specializing in telecoms, media, and technology. Prior to co-founding Emergent Telecom Ventures, Mr. Amersi ran Gramercy Communication Partner, which is a communication merchant bank based in the United States, which he co-founded with Telefonica. Prior to co-founding Gramercy, Mr. Amersi was one of Europe's leading corporate finance and M&A lawyers. Welcome, Mohamed. Next, we have Mr. Jayakrishnan, Director of International Enterprise Singapore. Mr. Jayakrishnan directs IE Singapore's strategy to develop and strengthen Singapore's trade and investment linkage with Middle East and Africa. Based in Singapore, he leads the group operations in Singapore, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Dubai, Jeddah, Riyadh, Accra, and Johannesburg. Welcome, Mr. Jayakrishnan. Last but not least, we have Mr. James Warrior, CEO of Centum Investment Company, and Centum Investment Company Limited, and it is based, I believe, in Kenya with its subsidiaries. And Mr. Warrior has been, and I don't know if he still is, the youngest CEO of the continent of Africa. Welcome, James. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. About 25 years ago, a quarter century ago, Africa has started its transition toward democracy, with national conferences being organized, with new constitution being written, with multi-party elections held, elections that are supposed to be fair and transparent. At the same time, in the 80s and the 90s, Africa raised a lot of hope about its economic development. But when the price of commodity plunged, that hope actually evaporated. But this time around, we see an Africa that is actually experiencing the best growth in the world. And at the same time, going along with this and the lessons learned from the 60s, the 80s, we have a new generation of entrepreneurs in Africa, well-educated, that are working with the local governments to try to put into place policies and to create an environment that attracts investments. So today, with me, my panelists will help us navigate all these minefields with all the challenges and opportunities, both in the areas of political transformation and in the areas of economic build-up, leading toward a solid and sustainable development. So in order to start this discussion, I would ask Dr. Jendai Fraser to actually set the stage with Africa today and where it is in the global context. Africa's current democracy and development efforts. Jendai, if you please.
Good morning, and thank you, Sheikh. It's a great pleasure to be here, and good morning to all of you. I'm not so sure it's fair for me to start a conversation about Africa's democratic transition, but I will step into the role. I think that really, as Sheikh has already started to set the scene to talk about the strength of the economies across the continent. Obviously, it's a huge continent, very diverse, many countries, and so it's hard to talk about trends, but you know, and that represent each and every country. Obviously, there's such tremendous diversity, but really for the last 15 years, Africa's economies have been extremely strong, and I think that the foundation of that strength is really in better governance across the continent. There have been these trends from the 1960s where we saw great exuberance about liberation from colonial rule. We saw the sense of the notion of the one-party state, which would be the great unifier of society and the great mobilizer of prosperity for the population, the idea really being that one has to be collective and unified about trying to move society forward from colonial rule. That obviously led to many dictatorships and coups d'etats. And so the experiment from the early 60s into the 70s wasn't as positive as the exuberance of independence would have led one to believe. And I think that that's an important lesson to make sure that even as transitions take place today, they're built on a foundation of democratic practice, governance, and institutions. Then you get into the 80s, really with the end of the Cold War and multi-party democracy taking hold across the African continent. And that multi-party democracy obviously is continued today with a greater emphasis in the 90s and 2000s on building institutions, building good governance practices, and making the benefits of prosperity inclusive. And I think that's where we really are today. How can, in fact, more people be brought into the economic growth that Africa has experienced? How can that growth be more inclusive to society? There are, of course, patterns that are troublesome from attempted coups d'etats. We saw that just recently in Burkina Faso and in other places, which is really a huge throwback, and one would expect no one in society would support a coup d'etat, even an attempted coup d'etat. And then also the debate today, particularly derived from Central Africa and East Africa, but also West Africa, of third-partyism, where you see ECOWAS, which is taking a mandate to say that they're not going to allow any country within their region to overturn or change the constitution, whereas in East and Central Africa, now I'm talking about the Great Lakes region in particular, it's a debate. And that debate we see in Burundi has led to a lot of turmoil. It seems to be progressing in Rwanda through their own institutional process. And of course, we see that Uganda also represents a country that got rid of its term limits and has had a president who's governed for quite so many years. And so I think that, you know, just to sum up, we have these broad trends. I think the important thing is that every society, every country really has to determine its own political path for itself. I don't think that outsiders can have an opinion. Just look at America and its politics. Everyone in the world has an opinion about who should govern America. But ultimately, it's the society itself. And when society says no third term, as it did in Nigeria, when President Obasanjo tried to stay, when society says to President Kampari in Burkina Faso, no third term, I think that really is what leads to the strength. The institutions and the society, the population itself, really over turbulent periods of developing the ability to dictate its own path, set its own agenda, live its own history. Everyone has the right to their own history. And then the final thing I will say is that it is very important, I think, for the democracy and prosperity of Africa, definitely to be considered within a global context. And here, I think African countries need to look to their neighbors. The size of the market, gaining scale, both from an economic point of view, in terms of economies of scale, but also from a political point of view, in terms of having alliances that can be leveraged globally, is extremely important for setting that agenda. And we see that, the BRIC countries are changing the nature of the global architecture that we live under, that has predominantly been Western determined. The BRIC countries are changing it, but Africa absolutely has the power of numbers, and it certainly can have the scale, if there's greater integration, to be a player in what is going to be the global architecture that, after all, determines the fate of nations as well as populations and societies. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Emersi Mohammed, would you still, in setting up the stage for discussion, cover what you perceive to be the challenges, especially in terms of governance, security, inclusiveness, migration of our human resources, and at the same time, what are the opportunities for the public, the private sectors, and also the civil society?
Thank you very much. I think that although Africa is poised to grow at a phenomenal pace, there are a number of very key challenges that I think everyone who's thinking of investing in Africa need to be very mindful. I guess the first and very basic point is that Africa is not a single country. It is a continent of 54 very different countries with very different languages, culture, rules of law, and ways of doing business. And in the sector that I practice in, which is telecoms, there is no better example than when the Indian company Bharti Airtel invested in Africa, and they sort of assumed that the practices that they were conducting in India could very easily be followed in Africa, and they discovered that that wasn't the case, and that Africa was very, very different, and each country had its own unique propositions. I guess on a more specific note, I guess the key challenges are, firstly, there is still a very big perception that corruption and bribery are prevalent in African societies and Africa's way of doing business. There is, unfortunately, some element of truth to this, because in a number of countries, there are scandals that come up from time to time. And I've been tracking this whole sustainability bribery issue now for a while, and I believe that while there is, if one has to apportion blame on all this, of course there is some blame that has to come to Africa, but there is also some blame that has to come to the people who think that that is the only way of doing business. And what I think that Africa really, really needs, and I'm trying to work on this with the Said Business School at Oxford, the Blavatnik School of Government, as well as a firm like ALN, is that Africa needs a single universal bribery code that should initially be voluntarily adopted by each African state, and then as time goes along, it should become a mandatory part of the legal system. The advantage of doing something like this is that it will avoid forum shopping, because countries like Kenya today do have bribery, anti-bribery legislation, but a number of African countries do not as yet have a developed system. And so that allows people to say, well, it's more flexible here, less flexible there, let's do this, let's do that. Also, in terms of the application of foreign bribery regimes, well, you see that the US with their FCPA and the UK with their Bribery Act are basically preventing American and Western companies from investing in Africa. Unfortunately, the same does not apply to companies from China, from Korea. So there is a takeover of Africa really from a number of the Asian countries. And whether this is in the interest of Africa or whether this is in the interest of the West, well, time will tell. So this is one absolutely key challenge. Linked to this also is another challenge which they teach you in business schools, which is that when you enter a foreign emerging market, do you need to have a local partner, or are you able to navigate the minefield without a local partner? And this is a very important and a very tough question, because there is a conundrum. Ideally, you want to choose a local partner that is connected, that is strong, that can help you navigate the minefields and deal with local interference. However, then by definition, it means that this local partner is connected, politically connected, financially connected, and that gets you into sustainability issues. So how do you choose a local partner? How do you motivate them? Should they be having an equity interest? If they do, are these funded by them, or do you fund it on their behalf? And how do they monetize this? How do you choose a partner that can transcend change in regime? Because you want local partners to be agnostic politically. So if there is a change in regime, then it doesn't also mean that you've got to go and change your local partner. And the third thing I would just flag and then hand over to my colleagues is the rule of law. Now, the constitution in a number of these countries is a relatively new process. It's not tried and tested. There are major challenges, even with the constitutions that have been put into place. In many of these constitutions, a lot of power has been reserved for the executive alone, and there has not been the devolution of power that one expects in very mature democracies. So the rule of law, how is it applied? Is there confidence in the legal system? Is the judiciary independent? Those are all very key challenges. And I think if you look at the United Nations Guide for Ease of Doing Business, you will see that although the growth prospects in Africa are huge, the issues about just setting up business and understanding how long it takes to set up a business in Africa, generally African countries lag way behind. So if Africa wants to continue attracting growth, it has to make the ease of doing business, it has to climb up in the rankings of ease of doing business. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Now, I will turn to Robert Hersoff. In this, on this road to transformation, democratic transformation, and also economic development, some states are recording much more successes than others, particularly if you consider the two powerhouses of Africa, which are Nigeria and South Africa. Could you please tell us, in your opinion, whether it is the privatization programs and other effect, what are the lessons that we can learn from these two? Because the opinion is that one is moving forward while the other is sliding backward.
To me, the three institutions or bases for democracy that are required to make a democracy successful. Rule of law, as you rightly said, a free press, and a peaceful separation between church and state. And Africa has the ability to deliver all three of those and have functioning democracies. And I had a few chats this morning before the panel, and a number of people said to me, democracy ought not to be the holy grail of political result. But the more I think about it, it is. I know what these people are saying. They're saying maybe a benevolent dictatorship is a more interesting political situation in the growth, expansion, and consolidation phase of a country, where somebody who is benevolent, who believes in the country and the people, who wants to see investment and development in education and healthcare, to want to see people lift out of poverty, a growing middle class, maybe a strong individual is the right way forward. And there are a number of countries that have benefited from that. China in some ways, Singapore, Rwanda, and in some ways some of the GCC countries have, with a royalty element to it, have benefited, and the people have benefited as a result. But there are probably more examples of countries where there are leaders that are justifying their position as benevolent dictators who are not delivering the results to the people. But when you look at the happiness index, which is a wonderfully published index every year, the countries that rank in the top 10 are all democracies. And the happiness index really determines the best places to be born in the world, where you're actually having a chance of a better life. And they're all, interestingly, at least the top 5, are countries that have less than 15 million people, you know, a single religious heritage, and generally reasonably friendly neighbors. Neighbors can bedevil a country's future, by the way. A bad neighborhood can set you back. And all of them are democracies. So it does say that democracy is the holy grail of political systems, and it is what we should be striving towards. One generation ago in Africa, a third of countries were democratic. Today, 2/3 are. And you might say to me that not all of them are truly democratic, but I'll say to you, it's heading in the right direction. Africa's time has come. Better governance, better political situations, a greater investment climate. And in 2004 and 2005, I'll get to Nigeria and South Africa in a second. In 2004 and 2005, the list of issues for outside investors holding them back from investing in Africa were entirely related to governance, political stability, coup d'etat, macro issues related to governance. Today, those aren't the top few issues. The top few issues are issues like Mohammed mentioned, bribery, corruption, and micro issues. And the good news about micro issues is good management can resolve those issues. So Africa is by far and away a better investment climate. And our view is the perceived risk and the real risk is where the great arbitrage exists. The perceived risk of investing in Africa is still reasonably high. The real risk is very low. And if any of you invested in Russia and China and not in Africa, I think you've made a very big mistake. And in 10 years' time, you'll be regretting it. And I say that to you now. So let me get on to Africa, and particular South Africa and Nigeria. The great transition that happened, as we all know, is the election in Nigeria recently. That's one of the great things that's happened in Africa. Peaceful, and it looks like the new government of Nigeria will tackle corruption head on. Now, they're moving a little slowly. They haven't made the appointments they should have made by now, but I believe the trend is there. I believe this government in Nigeria can be so good for Africa, can be a leadership position, and can tackle the issues that have held that great country back for so long. South Africa, sadly, is going the other way. The great Madiba left South Africa, or gave South Africa, the greatest constitution in the world, the greatest legal minds in the world, taking the best examples of every country, produced the perfect constitution for South Africa. But they missed one thing. They assumed that the man or woman running South Africa would take on that constitution and believe in it. What they failed to put in place was the fact that somebody in power who was fundamentally corrupt could then start to undermine the key elements of democracy, and that is what is happening in our country. The ANC is not a bad institution, but there are people within the ANC currently running my country that are fundamentally corrupt, and they're setting back South Africa and setting back Africa. So on the one hand, you have Nigeria taking a great step forward and doing many of the right things. On the other hand, you have South Africa trying to undermine democracy so certain people can steal. And it's upsetting. And I think it's very sad, and I think we need a change in government there as quickly as possible. And we do have that candidate. Mohammed's saying, Rob, you're going too far. Not me. I'm the mayor of Africa, by the way, which is an unelected position, and you can't throw me out of my job. But just to finish very quickly, we have a young man called Musi Maimane, who's head of the Democratic Alliance, who I think is the future of South Africa. So if you believe in my country, which I do, my beloved country, let's try and get behind him. I'm a big believer in Africa. I think our time has come. Despite currency changes and commodity changes, this is a long-term trend, and we need to be invested.
Thank you very much, Rob. I hope that if one day I run for office, you will do the same for me. Anyway, you know, this dictatorship thing, we have seen that over and over through history. We have seen, due to foreign interference, exceptional growth during the term of dictators. Spain is a clear example, but it is not sustainable. Without democracy, the growth is not sustainable. So, you know, we are learning lessons from those, and we realize that the necessary condition for growth, for happiness and everything in the population is really to put into place a strong democratic system. Now, in our effort to do that and building the economy still, you know, Africa has been transforming its laws, putting into place, trying to put into place the best environment possible for investors to come. We have a new generation that is far better educated than the past one. Even though we see a lot of brain drain toward Europe and America and so forth. So what I would like Mr. Jayakrishan to do for us is to help us tie all this together. You know, what do we need to do in terms of human resource management? What do we need to do in terms of economic policies? What do we need to do in terms of security issues to attract investors to the continent of Africa?
Thank you. And first of all, to Atik and Sunita and the whole ALN team, thanks so much for having us back again, and congratulations on putting together such a fantastic event. It's a big question, but I think this discussion comes at it's very timely because of what's going on globally and economically. Things are slowing down, but I think all the more is at this juncture where all the players, public sector, private sector players, really have to look, take a hard look at themselves and look for those points of differentiation, because this is when things are going to get very competitive. FDI is going to go to those destinations in which the conditions are most conducive and where the returns are going to be highest. Just looking at our own transition as a country, Singapore, at the point of independence in 1965, the per capita income was $651. It's 50 years ago today. Today it's 55,000. In terms of foreign reserves, we had 300 million in 1965. Today it's $297 billion. So in one generation, it is possible to make those kinds of dramatic transformations, not just in terms of wealth and prosperity, but really in the overall well-being of every single citizen in the country. So it is within reach, and it's very possible in that kind of a time frame. But coming back to your question, Sheikh, in terms of the kinds of conditions that would work, And I also go back to what Dr. Fraser said. Every country, every one of the 56 countries in Africa is unique, very unique, and each one will have to find its own course and its own path. But I think there are, if we think hard about and look at different examples, we can distill a few factors, I think, that we can all try and apply. Some of it is just luck, and you get blessed with it. I think one, obviously, we hope that we can have visionary leadership, and that's tied in very closely to what Rob mentioned, I think, in the whole issue of governance, meritocracy, putting the right people in the right place based solely on merit. So that's, really charting the vision for the country and bringing along all the players with you. A second really important part of this picture, I think, is really in the economic environment. It's no secret, but what do all investors from wherever they are, what they're looking for is obviously policy consistency and certainty. And I think this is where African states can really make themselves stand out. Not creating any surprises for the foreign investor community. And even if they have to make some changes, to do that in a really calculated, deliberate way with as much consultation as possible with the investor community, domestic and international investor community. You also mentioned education. I think maybe it doesn't get said enough, but we tend to look at education sometimes in isolation. Let's build more schools, let's give every kid a laptop, better universities and so on. But I think it's so important that we look at education and skills as an intrinsic part of economic policy. So really, investing in education for the country as a part of your economic development strategy. It's so important, rather than looking at it in isolation. What happens in education, the product of an education system should flow naturally in as aligned a manner to the needs of the economy. And that's what investors, that's what corporates are looking for. If I'm bringing an investment to a country, do I have the right set of skills locally that are going to fill those jobs that I hope to create? So I think looking at education and how it is a real core component of an economic development strategy, I think that's critical. And the last thing I would say, it's really about implementation. I think there's an overload of planning, 5-year, 10-year plans, and so on. And those are great to have and important, but I think, again, the distinguishing factor from those countries that make the difference and those that don't is really the ability to execute and implement those strategies. Easier said than done, obviously, but I think that is, goes with the strength of institutions. Again, the people that we put into those institutions, how we reward them and give them the incentives to carry on those strategies, to implement those strategies for the long term. Just one point also, and kind of echo what Dr. Fraser said. Each country will have to find its own model. Democracy is a big word. Each one of us will have to find the kind of approach that suits our own profile, own characteristics of the country. And again, just in ending, just looking at the case of my country, of Singapore, we were never really welded to any one form. And we just did what was right at the time, and being very practical, being very pragmatic with what the requirements of that particular time in history was, and then we adjusted to it. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. And James, I come to you now, asking you, based on the fact that you are young, I would like to ask you to tell us, in your opinion, based on everything that we have heard, what should be now the agenda of Africa? What should Africa put into place in terms of agenda? We have regionalization going at full speed. so that we can leverage that regionalization to rebuild the infrastructure across the continent, to provide great level of energy for industrialization. I would like for you to tell us, generally, what do you think should be Africa's agenda, taking into account what the people say here? Africa is not a single country. It is 54 countries. So here is the question to you, James.
Thank you for that question. My view is that the agenda should be strengthening the ability of African countries to produce and to produce competitively. For a long time, African countries have been seen as consumers as opposed to producers. And the rest of the world many times views Africa as a market. And sometimes even we in the country focus more on what we can spend. I think there's a sense in which we need to focus on the economic institutions that will enhance our ability to produce. And just to tie back that to the topic, there's a nexus between economic institutions that are favorable to production and the quality of the governance. And many African countries, at the stage of development we are in, we are what I would call factor-driven economies. We are not yet at an efficiency level. We are focusing on the very basic institutions, economic institutions, and I'll just name a few. One is the quality of our institutional environment, the legal and administrative environment in which we do business. The second is the quality of the infrastructure, be it transport, be it energy. The third is the macroeconomic environment. The fourth is quality of healthcare and education. And the fifth, I'll just talk about the quality of the financial markets. Those are the basic sort of economic institutions that drive the ability to produce. And those economic institutions are really driven by the quality of the governance in the public realm, which is then driven by the democratic processes. I believe we can focus on economic institutions, we can do very well. The evidence so far is that there's been significant improvement. If I pick infrastructure as an example, and I use Kenya as a case study, and I just step back 2010 to 2015 today. In 2010, on power, we had an installed power capacity of 1,400 megawatts. Today, it's 2,400 megawatts. When you're in the country, you may not notice the change, but change is indeed happening. If I look at financial markets, and I see some of my colleagues in the banking sector, in 2010, 2015, the deposits from private markets have increased 2.5 times. Loan book has increased 2 times. So when you look at economic growth numbers, 5-6%, they don't tell the reality, the full story of what's happening at a micro level. I recall you introduced me as one of the youngest. I remember when I started my work in my employment in 2000, 15 years ago, I was running a building that had 55,000 square feet of space. We had 24 parking bays. And each parking bay we were charging $30 per month. And it was difficult to get all those 24 parking bays occupied. The economy was just not strong enough. Today, we are developing a retail and commercial center of 870,000 square feet. And we are about to open, and it is 70% let, without much advertising, with in excess of 2,000 parking bays. That tells you that when you're flying at 10,000 feet, you have a macro story, but when you're on the ground, you have another micro story that sort of tells a very different reality. And for us who are in business, I focus more on the micro numbers. So the point is, just to come back, there's been an enhancement of democracy. That democracy has resulted into an enhanced governance of our public institutions, and that has resulted in a strengthening of our economic institutions. The other point I would like to make, and for us also operating in the market, I think we perhaps need to be a bit more patient. You know, when you look at an economy like Botswana that has experienced an interrupted democratic regime since 1966, democratic dividend is reaped where you've had a sustained period of the development of the polity. If I look at Kenya, we had our first multi-party democracy elections in 1992, and the ruling party only left power sort of in 2001. It's only 15 years. So perhaps we need to be a bit more patient, because that path is not necessarily a smooth curve. You're going to have various challenges. Now, as an investor, you're looking forward. That's what's important. My sense, the political environment and the quality of governance will only get better. And the quality of economic institutions will only improve. And at the World Economic Forum Index have improved, but we still have a way to go. And in that movement, in that delta, there's significant returns to be made. And that is the opportunity. And that, with Robert, when he says that if you've not invested in Africa, you're probably making a... I've been CEO of Centum since 2008. When I took over as CEO of Centum, we had $60 million of assets under management. Today we have close to $2 billion of assets under management in a span of 5 years. I expect that in another 5 years we'll perhaps be approaching $10 billion of assets under management. We've earned a return of about 30% on dollar. So there's an opportunity and there's profits made. What's the opportunity for us in the private sector? One, I think we need to be able to demonstrate that it is profitable to invest in Africa. Those success stories need to be told more so that we can reduce the perception of risk, not just by speaking about it generally, but by demonstrating the opportunity that exists. The second point, I think that second thing we can do is development of enterprises. Because unlike the West, you do not have a long period of time where companies have been built. And so in my organization, for instance, we made a decision we're not going to compete with international investors and foreign investors. Looking for opportunities in the secondary market, we're going to focus more in developing opportunities that investors can then come and participate in. Because you don't have, the market for existing opportunities is small, and in competing for those particular opportunities, you sort of tend to, to trade up. What can the international community do? I think that economic progress strengthens the democratic progress. So you have public institutions strengthening the economic institutions, but as the economy grows and does better, you have more and more stakeholders. The challenge we have with many African countries is that not enough people have a stake in the economy. As you get more people having a stake in the economy, you're then going to be able to strengthen the democratic institutions.
James, can you touch on that?
And so in conclusion, the final point I want to make is around the trade protocols. We've had a lot of support from international communities on strengthening our democratic environment. I think we also need support around trade, because we as local manufacturers and producers, the economies are opened up, and therefore you don't have the scale to produce domestically, and the economies have become more outward focused around the point of importation. I think the more we're able to produce domestically, the more you build your domestic economies, the greater our ability to strengthen the democratic environment, and therefore the greater the ability you have to build your economic institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, we have an agenda that he's going to bring here, His Highness Sheikh Nayan around 10:30. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change a little bit the program by going to the floor and picking up some questions, and then still leave aside some time for every one of the panel members to be able to give a 1-minute concluding remarks. So who is the first one who has a question for this panel?
History recognizes that the great powers of the past have been ones with very strong manufacturing bases, and we've seen that with England and colonial powers. We've seen that with Germany currently. We've seen that with China and India also currently. Africa, whilst it has a lot of wealth in terms of resources and so on, doesn't really have a very strong manufacturing base. Do you think Africa can be a strong power without a strong manufacturing base?
Who is this question directed to?
Anybody on the panel willing to answer?
Absolutely essential that Africa develops its manufacturing capacity. somebody who defined a colony as any country that exports raw materials and imports finished products. It's a colony because the value add from a raw material to a finished product can be as much as 20, 30, 40 times. What has held us back? And what has held us back, I believe, is changing. One is power. Cost of power and availability of power has been a challenge that is now being addressed in many countries. Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, that is being addressed. Secondly is transport. That has been a major challenge. Our ports, our railway, our connectivity, that has been a challenge. Again, it's been addressed. And we are seeing, for instance, in Kenya, Port of Mombasa is expanding. Lamu, Tanga is expanding. We are seeing better railway networks. The cost of transport is coming down. The third one is human resource, and that is also improving. The fourth one that is very critical is the scale, the market scale. I'll give you an example. We're involved in a motor vehicle assembly company. Just 5 years ago, I'm just wrapping up. Just 5 years ago, we were selling, the whole market was 10,000 vehicles. Today it's 20,000 vehicles. Manufacturing is a game of scale. And as you integrate more, you then can build that scale and then build a manufacturing capacity with the competitiveness to also export to the rest of the world. In the past, that has been a challenge.
I appreciate that. You know, we are pressured because of time. You know, we don't know when His Highness is going to come. And I certainly don't want to break this without giving the opportunity to every panelist to make their final comment. Now, in order to do that, let's start with you, James. You know, you have 1 minute to give your final thought.
Very good. I think investing is a game of looking at what the future is likely to be. My sense, looking at the next 20 years, is that we're probably going to have at least 10 African economies that are going to be among the top 50 competitive countries in the world. That's going to happen. That's a trend. And when that happens, in that delta, there's a lot of value that is going to be created in certain sectors. I think one should not look at what's happening in the short term. If you ask me what's my bet on the sectors one would be looking to investing, anything that is addressing consumer demand, consumer needs, healthcare, education, agriculture, power, financial markets, there's a huge opportunity to be created. I would encourage all of you to come into the market now and start participating in these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So to save some time, I'm just going to proceed. Yeah. Please, Robert.
I think investing in Africa, it's just about patience. Take your time. Things do take longer, but the fundamentals are there. We have 54 countries. By the way, I don't think we can create a USA. I think we need to go for regional integration first. But I like what you said. I like your style. I think we've got the human capital. Africa's time has come, and investors should just be patient. Good things will happen because there are good people there.
Thank you, Robert. Mohammed?
I just want to touch on 3 or 4 of the things that were said today. On manufacturing in Africa, I think that unless Africa comes up with either product innovation or process innovation, it's going to be very, very difficult. So its best place is to look at reverse innovation in things like solar power, etc., and see how they can do something that will benefit the rest of the world. The second point I would like to make is that Africa should try to follow India's example of imposing a mandatory CSR tax, which in India is now 2%, because that sort of capital base can then help promote a number of regions as well as businesses that are badly needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Mr. Jayakrishnan.
Thank you. There's a lot of concern these days about macro weaknesses, global economy. Same applies to Africa, slump in resource prices and so on. But we are still very positive on Africa, and we think the opportunity is the micro level with the private sector in niche industries and niche sectors, and that's what we're looking for. Not the whole continent, it's looking at specific countries and within that specific sectors and trying to identify those private sector players that are the ones to take it forward. The private sector is going to be the generator of jobs or wealth in partnership with the governments.
Thank you very much. Dr. Jendai Fraser.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the trend that's most important is the demographic trend, and particularly that in the next 85 years, half of the world's youth population will be African. That's really quite significant, and therefore I would say the most important investment is in education, in those youth, those young people, giving them the confidence and a sense of human dignity to shape their own destiny. I think that's critical. So when we think about democracy and governance, I think of it as human freedom, the capacity of an individual to actually pursue what their heart's desire is. And when I think about prosperity, I again think that education, creativity, and innovation are going to be the key to Africa's development. Thank you.
Mohammed, do you have something to add?
Sure. I just want to add one thing on education, because that's the theme that the doctor has taken up, Rob has taken up as well. So we are invested in an education platform in Africa called Bridge. And Bridge aims to provide education to families that cannot afford to pay more than $6 a month in school fees. And one would have thought that governments all over Africa should bend backwards to promote enterprises like Bridge. In Kenya, it's where it started. We have 420 schools with 150,000 students. You cannot imagine how challenging that business model is for Kenya today, and how difficult it has been to roll out similar models in other African countries. The problem is that the government is simply unable to provide education, and when private education enterprises like Bridge, which have been funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, by DFD, by IFC, try to fill in the void, they get a lot of resistance.
We have reached the 10:30 points. That is the time that was given us 1 hour to go through this very complex, but at the same time, very exciting topic. And myself, I have learned a lot from this panel. I'm going away with in mind that Africa needs to innovate. I'm going with a mind that Africa needs to educate, but not just to educate for the sake of educating, but we need to tie education to actually development agendas, by training people. I'm going away with the thought that we need to actually build a very reliable and strong infrastructure in transportation across our nations. And I'm going away with the fact that we need also to generate as much power as possible for industrialization of the continent. But I'm going away with the fact that, and Jendai put it much more emotionally than I ever can, that in order for the African people to really reach their full potential, people need to have democracy, they need to enjoy their freedom, they need to be able to live off of the benefit of their work without any interference from government and also from outside, of course. And I'm going away also with the lesson that, in fact, these 54 countries, each would have to, based on their culture, based on their history, find their own way toward this democracy so that the vision that we have, because one thing we do have, as I travel a lot in Africa, I am aware of a shared vision from almost all over. That is the vision of an Africa that is at peace with itself and at peace with the rest of the world, where actually people can be whatever they have the potential to be without interference. People realizing that we dream of an Africa where people are well educated and where they are cared for in terms of health, where everybody have access to health care and education. We dream of an Africa where we are very, very jealous of the environment that we are going to leave for the next generation, taking care of our environment. We dream of an Africa that is no longer the Africa that is receiving all the time, but an Africa that is capable of contributing to all the great endeavor of humanity. This is the kind of thing that we are dreaming of, and I hope that you guys everybody here takes something out of this panel with them, and that during the 2 days or 1 day and a half that we're going to continue this discussion around coffee. And I would like all of you now to join me in really thanking these esteemed panelists that I have the privilege to have talked with and get to know in these few hours. I thank you very much.